JJK 270 leaks are here. The delay is over. Strap in. Spoilers beware. The chapter begins with a panel of a tombstone, and we see that both Megumi and Shoko are here visiting this grave. Megumi says, "Thank you very much." And we see that written on this grave, it says Fujiguro family. Shoko says, "Don't mention it. Even if all that's left is to just burn it, cleaning up the body is something always worth doing. I'm happy if, thanks to me, somebody looks pretty in the afterlife." We then see that this is chapter 270 titled Dream's End. Shoko then says, "Should have left Geto to me as well. What an idiot." Megumi says, "Yeah." And Shoko continues, "Well, it's not like I believe in the afterlife anyways." And she just starts laughing, and Megumi just kind of sits there silently. On the next page, we see Megumi and Shoko walking out of the cemetery when Megumi gets a phone call. So he picks it up and says, "This is Megumi." "Yes, I understand. I'll head right there." We then see Shoko, who has a cigarette in her mouth this entire time so far, kind of take it out, look at it, and then fling it to the ground without ever lighting it. We then see just a black panel of dialogue, and we hear Gakuganji, who says, "Among the remains of Sukuna that were ripped away from Megumi, what was left behind was Tengen, who had been absorbed." We then cut to inside the Tomb of the Star corridor, where Tengen used to, stay and chill and maintain the barriers and everything. And we see that Urahime, Nita, and Gakuganji are in here. Urahime says, "Then Tengen's barriers around Japan will be ... and she kind of cuts off. Gakuganji says, "By placing Sukuna's remains in here, it should hold for a little while longer." Nita says, "I'm so glad." And Urahime says, "We need to immediately come up with a strategy and a general plan." Gakuganji says, "Don't be so impatient. Everyone is still young." We then just have a full panel close-up of Gakuganji where he just says, "Everything will be fine." We then transition to a scene with Maki, Mio, and Daido. And in case you don't remember who those latter two are, they are the two guys that helped fight Curse Naoya, the sumo guy and the swordsmith, if you'll recall. So Maki says, "Here you go." And she hands over a sword to Daido. And he goes, "Ah, katana." And Maki says, "The culling games are no longer functioning. This is probably because the incarnated players are taking steps to accomplish this together. Since Megumi came back, it's a gamble, but it's pretty much certain that they're moving ahead with Hana and Yuji pulling the cursed items from the victims." Maki continues and says, "Through the added rules, we'll probably go and try to recover the players that were taken by the American military forces as well. So even though you guys aren't our enemies, we don't expect you to help us with all of this. I'm just kind of talking to myself." So, even though the culling games are basically over, Tokyo is still a volatile area because the existence of cursed spirits was publicly announced as something that only happens in Tokyo. So curses from all over have continued to kind of congregate there. So Maki says, "If it were me, I would maybe head there if you're looking for things to deal with." And Daido says, "Yes, there will be no shortage of things to cut down." Mio says, "I don't like it. Sumo with cursed spirits is really boring." Maki says, "Well, do what you guys want, but this is all I can do to cover for you guys, so get lost now." However, as Maki has turned to leave, Daido calls out for her and says, "Maki, when it's time to erase me, you should come. I will cut you down." And he's kind of smiling as he says this, and Maki laughs, and the sumo guy just says, "Sumo!" All right, so I just want to add my own bit of interpretation to this because the translations were a bit rough. Essentially what's happening in this scene is Maki has gone to meet up with Daido and the sumo guy in order to warn them, basically thank them for their help earlier in the manga, right? So she hands Homeboy a sword here and basically tells them everything that's been going on, fills them in on what happened with Megumi and Sukuna and the culling games, and is letting them know that the plan now is Yuji and Angel are going around trying to help all of the rest of the incarnated sorcerers. Because of Yuji's soul punches and Angel's Jacob's ladder, they're able to free the incarnated sorcerers just like they did with Megumi and Sukuna, right? So that means that Daido and Sumo Guy are ultimately going to be on that list because they're incarnated sorcerers. So Maki's like, "This is the best I can do for you guys by giving you this heads up and letting you know this information. So do with that as you will. And then she leaves. But, Daido says, hey, well, whenever we get on that list of calling games players to deal with, you should come too, so we can have one last battle type of moment. We then cut to Charles, who is the manga guy, if you guys don't remember, and he is seemingly working on something at his desk as we hear the sound effects of his pen like rapidly moving back and forth. And he says, print magazines should remain. The creator can receive feedback from how printing affects the manuscript's quality. Charles continues and says, newbies should experience working side by side with a veteran at least once. And then we see that there's another guy in this room as well, who is seemingly his editor. And he says, well, you did have a bad experience with that after all. And Charles is just continuously, furiously working here. And Charles says, I'm a mangaka whose art sucks. And then just more scribbling. Then the editor says, hey man, hurry up. The printers aren't going to wait for a newbie's one-shot. And Charles says they shouldn't even wait for a veteran's one-shot. We then cut to Takaba, who is having a conversation with somebody. And the way these panels are drawn, we cannot see the other person's face, but we can see their hair in one of the panels, and it looks a lot like adult geto or kenjaku. But more on that after I talk about what they say here. So we see the conversation just begins with Takaba mid-sentence basically saying, so that's why we need to have a lot of dirty jokes, and that's good, okay? But let's keep away from the erotic jokes, because even though they're also dirty jokes, it's kind of and then he lists what I think are two old school comedy mangas, but the translation's rough here. Apparently they're lowbrow humor. And so then the other person, who again, we don't fully know who this is, says that's pretty much the same thing. And Takaba goes, no, I'm saying that they're completely different. Were you not listening? All right, enough. Let's just go practice our routines. And then the other person says, can you not say practice our routines so loud? And Takaba goes, hey, are you paying today? Because they're at a cafe. Practicing our routines, by the way, is not a dirty joke. Why can't I say that? So I think there's some pun or something happening here that the translation is not picking up on, but that's what the whole practicing our routines bit is about. All right, I don't really know what to make of this page because, like I said, we don't see the face, but it certainly looks like Geto/Kenjaku. So I'm not sure if this is supposed to be an implied flashback to back during Takaba and Kenjaku's battle, and this is just one of the scenes that we didn't get to see back then of them, maybe prepping for the final comedy routine that we see, or if it's not a flashback and it's in the present time and he has some sort of new comedy partner that just so happens to have the same exact hair as Geto/Kenjaku. So maybe we'll get more context on this later in the chapter. I'm reacting to this and making this video as I read through it with you guys, or maybe we'll need to wait for better translations to figure out what exactly is happening. We then transition to a scene with Rin, who is the guy with the sugar curse technique, and it's like a recreation of the Geto Gojo KFC breakup scene from Hidden Inventory, when Gojo doesn't hollow purple Geto and Geto walks away. The paneling is 100% a spoof on that, except it's this guy and a character that I don't think we've ever seen named, but that I think was just another student, perhaps that Rin maybe bullied. And so he says, hey, long time no see. And the other character goes, what? And Rin says, that time, I'm really sorry for that. Rin then performs a deep bow as he's apologizing, and the other character is very confused by this, doesn't say anything, just turns and walks away. Very similar to how Geto walked away. And we see Rin, who's just extremely disappointed in himself. Rin then lets out a deep sigh and just says, man, I want to become a decent person. We then cut to a scene with Higuruma, and there is a young woman who is seemingly a lawyer that walks up and tells him, hey, they're not going to prosecute you. So Higuruma says, probably pressure from headquarters. It seems they want me to work hard as a sorcerer now. Higuruma says, I'm sorry, I guess what's next is, and the other lawyer cuts him off and says, starting over, I will face forward, Higuruma, as a representative of the bereaved family. And Higuruma says, please. So the added context here is this is definitely in reference to the two people that Higuruma killed that he's been feeling extremely guilty over. It seems as if the higher ups got those charges dropped because they don't want Higuruma going to prison or facing punishment. They want him to be working as a sorcerer. We then cut to Megumi and Hana in a hallway together, and Angel's mouth appears on Hana's face and begins speaking and says, Sukuna using a method like that means he had already dug through Megumi's memories in order to find out information about Hana. So there's nothing to be embarrassed about at this point. And Hana just says, shut up. Megami then kind of emotionless just says, I will take full responsibility. I will become Hannah's right arm from now on. And Hannah is like shocked and he goes, oh, when will we do the ceremony? And Megami goes, not like that. I didn't mean like that. I have a mission, so let's talk later. Hannah is then kind of like kicking herself for blowing it. And she goes, oh, I was too hasty, but his speech was all broken. So like maybe that's a good sign. All right, so the added context here is that Angel is referring to the moment when Sukuna first inhabited Megami, and Angel showed up and used Jacob's ladder on him, right? But then Sukuna tricked her because he pretended to be Megami because he knew that Hana had feelings for Megami. So that's what she was saying. Don't be embarrassed about it. Sukuna had just already clearly gone through Megami's memories enough to know that you had a crush on him. And then Megami saying, so I'll take responsibility for your right arm because that's the moment she lost her arm because Sukuna bit it off. And she thought he meant marriage, but he just meant that like, I'll, make sure that I handle the responsibility of taking care of all the things you've lost because of me. We then transition to a scene with two characters that we've never met before. They appear just to be a young couple, and the woman is arriving home in this moment. So she opens the door and says, hey, honey, I'm home. Hey, do you want to go out and get dinner tonight? And the guy says, yeah, that sounds good. And as he turns around, we see that his face is like grotesque. His eyes are like 30 times bigger than normal, and he's just smiling as he stares at her. We then transition to a panel of Ijichi, who is seemingly describing this very case where he says, the victim was Fukuzawa Sota, male, 26 years old. According to his fiancée living with him, his face has changed since about 2 weeks ago. We then transition to Yuji, Nobara, and Megami basically at this young couple's apartment. They have been dispatched to go deal with this case. And Megami is holding up some sort of photo and he goes, how does it look? And Yuji goes, he looks like a pro wrestler to me. You've got a great body, dude. Like, what do you do? What's your workout routine? And the guy just starts like awkwardly laughing and he goes, well, yeah, I did wrestle up until high school. And Megami goes, he looks like this to the girlfriend. And he holds up this picture of a drawing of the guy with the massive eyes. And he goes, so the one who's cursed is actually her. And the girl's like, wait, me? And Megami says, Nobara, handle this. And Nobara goes, okay, big sis, let me do a little bit of a body check on you. So Nobara and the young woman then exit the room for her to conduct her investigation, and then we're left with a conversation between Yuji and Megami, where Yuji says, well, according to Ijichi-san, the residue that can be sensed is only like a very small amount. And Megami goes, yeah, there's a low chance of it being an actual cursed spirit. And Yuji goes, oh, really? And Megami says, yeah, she's not haunted by the cursed spirit itself, and yet the residue and atmosphere and damage are still, like, annoying what's happening here. So it's probably a curse user. But even then, there's no feeling of, like, murderous intent here, so I think it might be a surviving Culling Games player, one of the awakened type. However, it is possible that a semi-first grade spirit could have thoughts and intent and be capable of holding that back intentionally, because there are patterns where they increase the damage later, like with the Yasobachi bridge, so I can't completely reject that possibility. Yuji says, okay, so it's probably harassment by a curse user, so that's going to be an easy win with the three of us here. And that's where the chapter ends. So they have been sent to investigate this woman who's been cursed, as we find out, cursed to view her fiance that way with the huge bug eyes. And the crew is trying to solve this mystery and help these people. We do have an editor's note that says, next chapter is the last chapter, the last mission. Itadori and Co. against the harassing curse user. We also know that there's going to be a supersized center color page next week. And no break. No break. Just the final chapter next week. It's still too real. I can't believe it's almost over. So yeah, this video is always already really long because of all of the yapter, but Interesting, very, very interesting. Still no mention of the gojo situation, which I just find so, so strange. Like it's weirdly absent. And I don't even mean that like he didn't come back and that's what's weird. I just mean that like it's still just not even been mentioned or touched on or grieved or anything. So I have to imagine this strangeness is kind of like an intentional setup, and we will find out something in the final chapter, but maybe not. But Gojo stuff aside, yeah, Gege is basically just kind of flashing between everyone, showing what everyone is doing, what they're up to, which makes a whole lot of sense for the end of a series, right? But it then just makes the whole Takaba situation that much weirder, right? Like, what is going on? The implication there is that it was obviously Geto slash Kenjaku, presumably Kenjaku. And so I'm wondering, like, with Takaba's cursed technique, the one that can, basically manipulate reality, did he bring him back because he missed his comedy partner? I think that's like the more crazy kind of implication. And I think that maybe we're like supposed to think that. But what I'm wondering is if that's not what's happening, and instead Takaba, who just instead extremely misses his comedy partner in the best moment of his life when he did that, routine with Kenjaku, maybe he like hired somebody to like look like him. Like he hired somebody and be like, hey, you need to do your hair exactly this way. Like just trying to recreate that magic. And I think that would be like a really funny joke and play on our expectations. But honestly, it could go either way. Since everything else in this chapter wasn't a flashback, now that I've had time to think about this, I don't think it was a flashback. So I think it's either A, some crazy application of his curse technique, or B, like a joke and it's somebody that's just been dressed up to look like him. So yeah, let me know y'all's thoughts on all of this. Like I said, this was a long one, so I don't want to ramble on too long here, but we will, of course, be putting out videos throughout the week on this penultimate chapter. So, as always, guys, thank you so much for watching.